everybody, it's Sarah, and today I have part 2 of a rant review for you that I filmed and uploaded over a year ago. And that rant review was of The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, which is the first book in a Chinese history-inspired adult high fantasy series. And the rant review I did on this, in fact, is my second most watched video on my channel. It's one of the videos that I, in general, got most interactions on, I think. And I was actually quite happy. I was quite scared because I uploaded a rant review that there would be like a lot of people just really nasty in the comments. However, most of the comments I got were really respectful, and I had a lot of really amazing discussions in the comments where we talked about each other's viewpoints. None really changed their viewpoints, but we still respected each other. And I hope it can also be the same in the comments of this video. However, that video is also my most disliked video on my channel, with it being the only video that has more dislikes than likes. And that is because The Poppy War and its sequel, The Dragon Republic, are quite hyped and quite well loved on BookTube, as well as just the booksternet sphere in general. And so why do I feel the need to make a second video, a follow-up video, as you will, of that first rant review? First of all, let me just tell you, it's not because of the views. I do not really care about the views. I mean, if this gets a lot of views, then great, and if it doesn't, then it doesn't. However, even though I only gave this book 1 star, it's one of 3 books that I ever gave only 1 star. It's one of the books that made me the most angry I have ever been because of a book. But yet I was still interested enough to see how the author continues on with the series that I recently in May picked up The Dragon Republic. And I'm now almost done with that book. And I will have 2 reviews up for The Dragon Republic as well. I will have one that's more of a discussion with spoilers and one that's spoiler-free. And so I was thinking that I'm probably going to talk about my rant review, about my feelings on The Poppy War in those reviews as well, and I will link that rant review below in the description box. However, which by the way, I will link that rant review down below and up there. However, I do not 100% agree with the way I did that rant review anymore. I do mostly agree with what I said. I still hold the same opinions. However, I do not like the way I formulated a lot of them, and I do not like the way I presented myself in the review in general, because I filmed that review directly after I had finished The Poppy War, and The Poppy War made me extremely angry, to the point where I completely forgot in the past year that actually the first 4/5 of the book I quite enjoyed myself. And because of that anger, I didn't really take the time to reflect on why I was so angry and what it was that upset me so much about the book. I mean, I had some reasons, but they were the most obvious ones. And they are now not necessarily the main ones anymore. And also, I just said things that I don't agree with anymore. I think I said that, for example, you just straight up shouldn't go and pick this book up because it's extremely problematic and I hate it. And I do not agree with that anymore. Would I recommend the book? No, I still wouldn't go and recommend anyone this book. However, I do not think that that is the same thing as straight up going and saying, you should never read this book. Do I think that there's things about this book that I personally think can be construed as problematic? Yes. However, I can also see that the reasons why I found this book problematic are some of the reasons why other people love this book so much. And so that is why I wanted to make this follow-up to that review, not kind of as a contrast to the first review, because in the bare bones stuff that I'm saying I still agree, but kind of to just sit down and a little bit more calmly and collected, with having had the time of 1 year to reflect on all the things that make me so annoyed with this book, to just sit down and tell you about those things as well. And to have a video that I can link under my Dragon Republic reviews, where I can say, yes, it doesn't make me uncomfortable now to link that video, because I just sat down and I feel like I reflected on my thoughts and I make less absolute statements. So yeah, that is why I wanted to sit down. And that was a very, very long intro to this rant, to which I will add probably in a few seconds, kind of. I mean, that was like the intro to the video now, and now comes the intro to the review. And that is how will I conduct this review, this rant discussion. I'm not sure what I should call it. And that is, it will be spoiler-free, mostly. I will not go out of my way to be spoiler-free. However, I will try not to go into any specifics and just kind of to refer to scenes in vague sentences, like for example chapter 21, which people who have read the book will know what I mean with those. However, for those of you who have not read the book, it won't be a spoiler. It might get a bit confusing though. I cannot promise that it won't. And so yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And now let's get into the review, and I will put this book down. The first thing I very quickly want to mention is something that might not be an issue for some people at all, and might be a very big issue for other people, and I feel kind of in the middle, which is why I wanted to mention it. And that is the obvious fact that I am a white woman talking and criticizing a book that was written by a Chinese American. That is an own voices story that deals a lot with trauma in Chinese history. And a lot of my problems come from the depiction of that trauma. So that is also why I feel like I have to mention this, that I have to show that I am aware. And I don't think that's necessarily something that automatically makes my criticisms less valid. However, I do think that if I'm not aware of that, that kind of takes away validity of my criticisms. Because it's important, especially when we're talking in like power imbalance situations, that we're aware of who we are and where our own experiences come from. Because those experiences can change the way that we view books. And a lot of my criticisms of these books don't necessarily come from me being a white woman, but come from me as a person nevertheless, and what makes me uncomfortable in the depictions of certain people in books. So now I have two parts of my criticisms of this book. The first part is something that has to do directly with the story. And the second part very much has to do with the impact of the story on the reading community. Let's start with the story itself, and that directly connects to my criticisms I had in my first rant review, which was that the thing Rin did at the end of the book made me deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And by the way, that is something I really appreciate the comments I got on that video, that they were all really polite. However, all of the comments tried to explain to me why Rin did what she did. Storage was full. Anyway, where was I? Right. People tried to tell me why Rin what she did, and my reaction to that was, I know why she did what she did. My problem was the framing around it. I think I specifically said in my video that I don't have a problem with Rin doing what she did, but I had a problem with the execution of everything around it. And that brings me to my first criticism, which, even more than just the framing with the other characters of the thing that Rin did, this is much more what upsets me in the bigger picture of the framing in what Rin then did. And that is that the Muganese were very much only framed as inhuman and monsters in the story, which might be polarizing to say that I find that negative, because a lot of stuff what the Muganese did in the story is something that the Japanese in real life did during the Second World War and also before in China, but also in Eastern Asia in general. And also it's stuff connected to that the Nazis did. However, I do not like this thing that I have found personally, especially American authors do, that they take away the humanity of horrible people. And I think it's kind of along the lines of The Banality of Evil by Hannah Arendt, that you just have to be this kind of horrible, more monster than human to do horrible things. And I think it's so against our nature, because we do not want to believe that the potential to such evil, and it is, frankly speaking, evil, is in every one of us. basically. Kind of. So yeah, in my 1 year of sitting on it and thinking on it, I noticed that my problem with Rin doing the thing that she did at the end of the book isn't really, I mean, it was a little bit in the framing then around it at the very end, where she has friends who tell her, nah, it's okay, and she has friends who are like, what the fuck is wrong? And it seems like the friends who are like, nah, it's okay, the framing of the story pushes them more than the person who's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? But the framing goes much farther in the monstrous and inhuman way the Muganese are depicted. Because they are depicted just as monsters. And I think that kind of diminishes the horrors that have been done by the Nazis, by the Japanese during the Second World War, because it makes those monstrous actions by humans into just monstrous actions by monsters. And I just don't like the type of framing. And also similarly in the framing, the reason why I think it seems so positive what Rin does at the end, the framing around it seems so positive, is because the Muganese were all the time just depicted as monsters. So when she does what she does at the end, we don't feel bad as the reader. At least I didn't feel sorry for anyone. I was shocked, of course, but I didn't feel sorry. The framing in the story left no room for being sorry, because it left no room for the Muganese to be anything else but monsters. And I think that's why I got so many people commenting under my first video and kind of like excusing Rin's actions. And that was just something that made me really, really uncomfortable. And maybe it's because I am in kind of not a lucky position, but I am from Austria. We have to very, very much go into detail and into depth of all the facets of human monstrousness while we learn about the Second World War, because we do not have the excuse and we do not have the ability to just say, like, for example, the Americans to be like, yeah, we were the good guys, and we don't have that ability. We have it in our history that our ancestors did that stuff. My grandparents both fought in the war, and they didn't fight on any good side. I don't know one of my grandparents. I do know the other. I know the other wasn't a Nazi, but he still fought in the war. For a lot of people, it's just that every boy, as soon as he turned 16, I think, or 18, had to go to the army, because that's how it was. And for other people, we do have to deal with the fact, a lot of my friends have to deal with the fact that they had grandparents that were Nazis, because that's the history we live in. And so I think that's where a lot of my problems come from the depiction of the Muganese. Not really for the fact that I want to be like, yeah, but Nazis were humans too, they had good sides too. Like, no, fuck that shit. That's not what I'm saying. But just from, again, kind of banality of evil, that those people were still human. And if we just make them into monsters, then I think it can also become, just that's not directly related to the book, but then it can also become quite dangerous, because then we think that it won't ever happen again. And I think that's something that's happening quite a lot, just as history goes on and as the tragedies of the Second World War move to the past. And so yeah, that's one of my main reasons why I did not like that framing. The second is kind of harder to put down on the book as it is, and like more down to the reception of the book. And that very much has to do with chapter 21, which, as you will know if you have read the book, is quite horrifying. And what some of you might know, what some of you might not know, is that it is based one-on-one on a real historical event. Or is it an event? I don't know. It's based on history, on Chinese history. I think it was 1937, and it's called The Massacre or the Rape of Nanjing, in which the Japanese took the, I think then, Chinese capital and did horrifying things. And my problems around that come mostly from the reception of it. Because on the one hand you have people who are like, it's almost cartoonish with how over the top that chapter and that scene is, which I just find so much wrong with, considering that it's based on something that happened in real life history, and I'm getting angry again at those people. And I get that a lot of people just don't have the ability to imagine that humans could do something like that. But again, that also comes back to the framing of the Muganese as monsters instead of humans. So yeah, really don't like those. And it of course shouldn't be down to a Chinese American to educate Western audiences who probably will not know that it's something that happened in real life, that something like this did happen in real life, and please take it seriously. But at the same time, it's also no wonder that people don't know that it's based on history. Because fact is, I mean, there's a lot wrong with history in school as we learn it, as it is. But fact is, world history is fucking enormous, and there's no way you could learn everything you need to know or you should know in history in 4 to 8 short years in school. And so I do not blame Western audiences for not being familiar with Eastern Asian history. I do not even blame Europeans from other countries that they're not as familiar with Austrian history as I was. There's a lot of stuff I didn't learn about French and British history, for example. In school we never learned, for example, about the 100 Years' War. And that happened in my continent. And it took 100 years. That's why it's called the 100-Year War. Because there just simply isn't the time. So I get why history specifically is focused very much on where you live. For example, we also never learned about the American Civil War. We did learn about the War of Independence a little bit, but that's it. And also my guess is, whoever it is that's watching, maybe aside from if you're from Germany, you probably won't have learned a lot about Austria aside from the fact that we kind of played a major part in both world wars. And so that puts me like in front of a dilemma. Because in my opinion, R.F. Kuang is still writing for a Western audience. Not a white audience, but a Western audience. So there's a lot of people who will not have learned, aside from if they have interests on their own, or if they are maybe Chinese American, who will have learned about a lot of the stuff that this is based on. And that kind of gives them the right to say, hey, this chapter is kind of cartoonish how over the top it is, because there's nowhere in the book indicated that anything in this book is based on Chinese history. I mean, we know now. I didn't know, for example, how much of it was based on Chinese history until I started reading reviews, because I was kind of annoyed that everyone seemed to love it so much and no one seemed to have any problems with this book. And I was like, does no one see the same things I'm seeing? Which, like, fine if you don't, but at the moment when I was really angry, I was just like looking for people who thought similarly to me. And that was when I found out that a lot of the stuff is based one-on-one on Chinese history. And so I think I don't want to say that like someone whose history is trauma is the one responsible for educating the people who don't know about it on the trauma, because I don't think that's the case either. And that's kind of where I'm just really divided. But I still think that maybe she could have put it in a chapter at the very beginning or at the very end, like acknowledgements or something, give a link or whatever, make a dedication to it. And yeah, so that's the one part of the book that now makes me just really uncomfortable with chapter 21, because I do think that kind of like when I read chapter 1, and that was before I knew that it's based on history. I mean, I didn't think it was cartoonish because I have good taste and I don't think over-the-top violence ever is cartoonish, but I also wasn't particularly shocked by it until I read that it's like real life, and I read the real life accounts, which very much shocked me. So yeah, that's the one point where maybe I'm unfair towards the author, but I find it just really, really hard to just wrap my head around the fact that I can like the book and still be deeply uncomfortable with the reactions to the book. I cannot do it. I'm sorry. I tried, but I cannot do it. I mean, maybe it is down to the writing style. Maybe the writing style she did use made it seem, for some people, quite cartoonish. I don't know. I think in general, like, I'm really sorry, like, and she got a lot better in the second book. But I think R.F. Kuang, for a lot of the stuff that she wanted to do, she was really good just in the, like, ideas. But I do not think that she yet knows how to execute it properly, or didn't in the first book. And then the second problem I have also with chapter 21 is the whole trigger warnings thing. And I am a fan of trigger warnings. Let me just say, I'm like whooping every time I see a book that adds a trigger warning at the beginning or at the end of the book, because yes, please make trigger warnings in books normal. However, when it is just in connection to a chapter that details events that happened in real life, it just kind of, for me, gets this aftertaste of trigger warning, don't learn about this actual real life thing because it might trigger you. And it's just like kind of closing your eyes towards history and being like comparatively like, don't tell me about the Holocaust because it triggers me. And I know that fiction is different than history, but this just follows history so closely in that one chapter that just kind of the lines get blurred. And maybe I'm hypocritical on that part, because I personally, I have said before in videos, I do not read literature set during the Second World War or even the First World War, because I will go to any museum that's connected to it. I feel like it's kind of my responsibility to learn about the horrifying parts of human history. However, I do not like reading fiction about it, because they fall into two parts for me. One is kind of the, I'm not an author that's connected in any way to the horrifying things that happened during the Holocaust and during the Second World War, and I'm kind of just profiting off this tragedy because it's like a story you can write that easily like makes people reading it emotional, and it's just kind of served on a silver platter. And the second part is written by people who actually most of the time had a connection to the Second World War. A lot of it is exile literature or written directly after the Second World War. Most of it actually by German and Austrian authors, in my humble opinion. That just hits too close to home, and that's just too realistic, and I just can't deal with it. I mean, maybe I'm really hypocritical there, but I don't know, it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth if you put a trigger warning on history, basically. And so, again, it's fiction, and it's something where I do realize that this is something that is very specific for me, and I will in no way judge you if you see this differently than me. Because again, I do realize that it's kind of hypocritical, but it's one of those things where I'm like, I can't help, and this is how I feel. And this is why I still think that this is a 1-star book, in my opinion, because everything surrounding this book makes me angry. And some of it is connected directly to the author, some of it is connected to just, again, the stuff around it. And also, that's the last thing with the trigger warning, is that with the Holocaust we all learn about it, we all know about it, and maybe that's also something where I'm just a lot more sensitive when it comes to this book and chapter 21, because a lot of people don't know about it, and because a lot of people would be served by knowing about it and learning about it. I hope I made at least some sense in this video, and I hope I got across that I in no way judge you for liking this book anymore, but I do have these problems with this book, and I do have a lot of things surrounding this book that I find quite problematic. And probably, again, for example, if this book was written by a white guy or a white woman, I would just throw it straight up in the trash. But again, there's a difference between a traumatic story being written by someone who has own voices or someone who does not come from that history or that ethnicity, that group, that community at all, and who might have the best intentions, but ultimately just some stories aren't some people's to tell. Do you understand what I mean? I mean, I think everyone can tell every story, but some stories just have more impact and are less problematic when written by certain people. And so I do acknowledge that part, and I do, again, acknowledge that what she wanted to do with this book, I think, is really great. And fantasy is a great way, I think, to kind of deal with trauma in history and also deal, especially with colonialism. Fantasy has been used, or fantasy elements in books have been used for a long time and have a history of being used to kind of work through colonialism especially. So ultimately, I just gotta say, love the idea of this book, personally hate the execution. And yeah, that is it. I went a little bit all over the place again at the end, but I hope I still made sense. Tell me in the comments down below, again, please, respectfully, because we managed it in the first video, let's manage it in this one as well, especially since I feel like I'm a lot calmer in this one. So tell me in the comments down below your thoughts of what I'm saying. I'm really very interested because I love discussing this topic with a lot of people. I will leave my first rant review down below as well. I did have some positive things to say about the book, so if you want to know what I did enjoy about the book, go watch that review. And all the links to my social media are in the description box down below as well, so go and check those out. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and maybe subscribe, although I can feel the thumbs down collecting already again. And yeah, with that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!